thank you for joining us today, Aneace. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Amy. Wonderful to meet you.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think we've got lots and lots to get through. So first of all, can you introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Aneace. I'm speaking to you today from Singapore, where I live. I've been here around 17 years. I was in France for 20 years before that, Italy a bit, and then originally from the US, but I've lived most of my life overseas. I've been in the tech industry. The first half of my career, I was a CEO of a tech company I built in France, sold it in 2007, and then discovered that what I really loved was working with people. So that took me into executive coaching, which is where I am today.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. And what I want to understand is also, I want to get into your writing career as well, because I'm fascinated. I guess I didn't put two and two together just how biographical the first book is in terms of how it sort of mirrors the background. But can you tell us a bit about the first book, The Eagle That Drank Hummingbird Nectar, please?
Yeah. So The Eagle That Drank Hummingbird Nectar, I published that around a year and a half ago. It's a fictional account of an executive who's going through a major life transition at 50. And it really reflects what I went through at 50, just after selling my company. So around 20% of it is autobiographical, 80% is completely made up. But a lot of the themes are very real. And that came out of a desire to capture the emotions, the things going on inside when we're going through transformation at that age, or when I went through it. And I've seen others that I've coached that have gone through similar transformations. So I wanted to capture it in a novel format because I wanted to. I didn't want to do just a traditional leadership book. Here's how to transform at 50 after you left the executive world space, and then here's what to do. I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to capture the emotions and the driving forces that kind of trigger that change.
I was going to ask why that format, but hearing you answer in that way, it gives me all the insight that I need into a lot of the analogies in the book are very, very rich.
Yes.
And I think it lends itself well to that storytelling approach, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I wanted to push myself so through the coaching process, as I transitioned from a CEO to a coach, it was very difficult, as you would have noticed in the book. It was very difficult to learn how to stop telling people what to do and giving advice and suggesting things. And so putting it into a novel format really pushed me to do that in an important way. So I had a couple writing coaches along the way, and I still hear one of them in my head saying, you're telling them what to do here. And I go, no, I'm just describing a scene. And she says, no, reread it. You're really telling them what to do. So I reread it and I see, yeah, suddenly that's what I'm doing. I've kind of disguised it as a scene, but really I'm lecturing. So it helped me learn where my lecturing voice is. So it could kind of be squelched. So that it was quite good from that perspective.
Yeah, it must have been cathartic almost from your perspective to get those analogies out and those experiences.
Yeah, that was actually the hard part is that it resonates. When I would have people read it, the parts that resonate the most were the parts that were hardest to write and the most cathartic. So I'd go through and I'd read it and I'd say, well, if I'm not feeling catharsis right here, I better rewrite it. So that's exactly you hit it spot on.
And that one of the analogies that really hit home for me was the concept of the courage vampire.
Oh yeah,
because we talk about everybody. It seems everybody's talking about servant leadership these days, isn't it? And so, but you make the distinction between your need to be a hero and a servant leader, and actually being a courage vampire. Can you unpack that a little bit for the listeners, please?
Maybe I can share a little snippet of the scene that you're referring to.
Please.
So this was a real thing that happened to me. It was on a ropes course, where you're climbing up in the trees and you've got a harness on and all that. It was part of a leadership program, and I was paired up with a young lady who was very scared of heights, and you were supposed to go up to the top as a pair, and then one of you is supposed to put on a blindfold and let the other person lead them across. So I was told to put on the blindfold. I went up there, I put up the blindfold, and my partner didn't want to move. So I'm encouraging her, say, come on, let's go, you can do it. And she completely refused. So I said, well, no worries, I'll keep the blindfold on, get behind me, hold on to my straps. And I felt the bridge in front of me. I could feel it with my feet. And so I stayed blindfolded to respect the rules of the game. And I got us across. And my colleagues were clapping down below. And the facilitator was furious. And when I came down, she said, what the hell was that all about? I said, what? I got the job done. I got us both across. She said, you deprived your partner from tapping into her own courage, and you wasted the opportunity to learn how to really trust someone else. And I went away, and for 24 hours, that really sunk deep, and I had a much deeper experience of what it means to empower people. And that's where the notion of courage vampire came from, is that I would get my strength from someone who is scared, not able to move forward, and I can jump in and move forward, even if I don't know how to do whatever it is that needs to be done. But that process created my company. It got a lot of stuff done in my life, but it prevented some people from being able to truly move forward. So that's where I was sucking other people's potential for courage and using it to drive myself. And then I love how you connected it to servant leadership, because it really connects to that, because and I've noticed this many times in the people I coach at very senior levels, there's a certain type of work that we do that gives us a sense of value, and without it, it's hard to find our value. And that can be a scary thing. So then we have to sap other people's courage so that we feel valuable and worthy, and until we figure that out and look for our value and worthiness somewhere else.
It's that level of self-awareness that's so powerful, because isn't leadership like you're getting it done, you're getting the job done, I goes across the bridge, I'm going to be the one that's going to get us there. And early leadership definitely feels like that, whether it's early leadership in terms of building your own business or your first steps into a leadership role. I think often it can feel, I've got to be the one that gets us across the bridge.
Then when you take it to the next level, it's I've got to get other people to get me across this bridge, and it's really urgent. Same level of urgency, same level of iron will, but I'm going to demand that other people find their courage. I know they will. I'm going to believe completely in their ability to find their courage, and that's what will cause them to find their courage.
Are there other examples where you've got almost the converse of that? So after you'd learned that lesson, what would have changed? Had you needed to go through that situation again? How different would that have been?
If I had gone, so it does come up again. It does come up occasionally, even in my work when I'm working with a top team. It's just a few weeks ago, it came up again. There was a moment when I doubted the team was going to make the shift that they needed to make in terms of trust and things like that. And people were beginning to, the trust levels were going down. The ability to trust themselves was going down. And I needed to, in that moment, remind myself that because I was a facilitator and eyes were kind of on me, maybe not directly, but indirectly, I needed to believe very profoundly that these people would find their way in the moments that we were there in this very critical moment. And it was then that things shifted. So it's not necessarily me doing something differently, although it will appear that way. It'll show up differently, but it's really tapping into that profound belief in people's ability to find the courage to get done what they want to get done.
It's the nuance of leadership that I find fascinating. You can have all the models, you can learn all the frameworks, but it's this nuance that you get with the. I can't remember the phrase that you use in the a post that you put out recently. Was it seasoned empathy?
Yes.
Seasoned empathy makes matured resilience. It's that nuance that comes from the experience in leadership, and you, like I say, you can have the black and white, you can learn the frameworks, you can understand that inside out, but actually it's the grey areas that come with understanding the impact of your leadership that's so powerful.
Yeah. There's a story you'll remember in the book, and the textile factory CEO with fatalities at the factory. And in our conversation, it turned out that he assessed his level of commitment to safety at 9 out of 10. And he felt that would have to be good enough because 10 out of 10 is impossible. And he got angry at me for even suggesting that maybe people were dying because his commitment level was not 10 out of 10. But then after a while, he reflected on it after a few weeks, and then he found his 10 out of 10 commitment to safety. And it wasn't necessarily doing anything different. Like, it was already doing a lot of stuff for safety, but there was something missing. And his self-assessment of 9 out of 10 was an indication that he himself felt there was something missing. And it wasn't some doing thing. It was just really searching deep inside. What does it mean to be 10 out of 10 committed to safety? And he eventually found it, but it is in those subtleties that the leadership really shines.
Definitely. The other thing that stood out as well, you just said shine and prompted me, but in terms of the limiting beliefs piece, where you call it shining sunlight on trolls.
Yes.
I think fundamentally that's one of the things that leaders have to get past. I like the way the storytelling that sits around that. So limiting beliefs for leaders, we all have crises of confidence. We've all been through the mill over the last it's nearly 4 years now, isn't it, that everything's been sort of in flux. But can you talk us through the shining sunlight on trolls, what that means and how to overcome them?
So searching, so the limiting beliefs, a big part of it is being aware that this is happening, that these limiting beliefs are there, and then searching to shine light on them so that they become apparent. Part of that process are things that we can do individually. So there's one example that I often use because it's such a common one, is to search out binary thinking. We can either have profits or we can have innovation. Things like that. And whenever we hear an or, we can work on it and explore the and. So how do I have profits and innovation? So that's quite an easy one that a lot of people can find on their own. Some people get pretty good at recognizing their own limiting beliefs. Most of the time, though, you need someone else to bounce ideas off, and they'll hear the limiting beliefs. That's where coaching comes in. There are more and more senior executives that I know that are going through coaching programs so that they can do this themselves with their people. It is a very critical thing to be able to identify what are so what is something that sounds like a belief, so that you can look at it and say, okay, what if that's not true? Maybe I can try something different. That's the idea of these trolls. So we've got these things that are hiding. They don't like sunlight. And if we shine some light on them, usually they just kind of dissipate and go away.
It's those aha moments, isn't it, that you don't really realize that you're holding yourself back.
Yeah.
And that's the trolls analogy for me.
In the new book, I call them secret saboteurs, and I provide a lot of, at the end of every chapter, I provide around 20 or 30 secret saboteurs on that particular topic of that chapter, which are statements that a senior leader might make that sound very reasonable, but then when you look at them in more detail, they just kind of fall apart. And you can tell that they're not really ideal ways of thinking.
I'm looking forward to reading that. That's out next month, out in February, second summit?
Yeah, I'm hoping sometime in February.
And so tell us more about that book, because is it the same format? Is it allegorical? Is it autobiographical? So
it's much less biographical. This one is in the first person. It's my own voice, as opposed to the last one was a character, was a protagonist. It's more like a traditional leadership book. So it's mixed with stories and anecdotes. There are a group of 4 CEOs that I follow throughout the book. You would recognize a couple of them from the prior book, but here it's a much more normal leadership kind of book. So it's called Second Summits, and the idea is that we're looking at midlife as a catalyst for leadership transformation, which actually was the theme of the first book, but here I'm doing it much more explicitly. So we're exploring through what I call 3 winds of change of midlife. There's the physiological wind of change, so things that are changing in our bodies, physical things that are changing in midlife. There's the neurological wind of change, things that are changing in our minds. And then there's parental, that comes from many of the changes that are happening at around that time of life. Many people have kids who are growing up or leaving home when they're in their 50s or so. And that has a big impact on their leadership style. So I explore these 3 winds of change along with leadership traits that become, how to say this, the 3 winds of change create a very fertile environment for some exceptional leadership traits to emerge. And that's what I'm exploring in this book, is how do we harness this energy of midlife and turn it into something that really transforms us in our personal and professional lives.
I guess what's the rationale for that? Obviously, that's a personal space that you've been in or you're in at the moment in terms of that time in your life and you're going through those transitions. But is the premise that leaders have an opportunity in their midlife to further develop their skill set?
Yeah.
Is it an opportunity for those that may be earlier in their career or earlier in their life to, can you almost hack the process? What's the thought process around that? Is it time bound?
Virtually 100% of my work is with C-suite and top teams, and they're all in their 40s and 50s. So I very rarely do any work with someone who's not at the beginnings, at least, of middle age, midlife. The purpose of the book is to bring awareness to what's happening at midlife so that people can grow in a much more effective manner and find a lot more fulfillment and joy through the process. It's also a warning that some of these things, if we resist them, then we're not going to grow as easily. And it could have some drawbacks if we resist some of these changes. So it's looking at it from that perspective. I think slightly younger there is an awareness that things are changing, and if I can be aware of these things, it makes it easier when they do come up to engage in them.
It was a clumsy question that I asked, the way that I asked it, but I was sort of asking. So I'm 43 myself. I was asking, are there ways to almost get out in front of these changes?
Yeah,
and be aware of them, so you know what's coming down the track.
That's exactly the purpose. So, for example, if we look at neurological changes, we know now there's a lot of work on this now. The prefrontal cortex slows down. And so we tend to forget where we put our car keys, our iPhone. We don't remember possibly the details of a spreadsheet as well as we might have remembered them 5 or 10 years ago. I've coached people who notice these things happening, and they find themselves taking more detailed notes than they did when they were younger. Now, if we're aware that this is happening, we lean into it. If we're also aware that at the same time that the prefrontal cortex is slowing down, we have the two hemispheres, the right and left hemisphere, are communicating with each other much more than they used to. So there are new neural pathways that are connecting between the two hemispheres, which means that we're able to see patterns and make sense of things and connect the dots in a much easier way than we were younger. So if we know this is happening, we can lean into it and say, okay, let me make sure I got people around me that know all the details of the spreadsheet and remember where my car keys are and the phone and everything. And let me focus more on sense making and connecting the dots and finding patterns in complex stories. And that just helps people move into these much more senior roles because it fits that move, it fits that transition. Someone who's resisting it is going to struggle to memorize and know all of the spreadsheet details continuing with that example. And it'll look weird in a board meeting because they're obviously not comfortable. They're obviously pushing themselves and they're screwing up. They're being corrected by some of their people. Then they react because if they're resisting this, they may react to a subordinate correcting them in the board meeting in a way that's not appropriate. Rather than if they know that's happening, they can just laugh and they say, yep, there I go again. My prefrontal cortex is slowing down. Thank you for correcting me.
Again, it goes back to that self-awareness, isn't it? And what you were saying about coaching and somebody holding the mirror up to you to make you aware of these changes.
I see it in parenting. That's the first place I saw it. Before I saw it in the physical changes and neurological.
If you resist it and you push back on it, that is when you're going to feel out of your comfort zone. You're maybe going to feel like your career's coming to a close, or you're not not switched on as you used to be, maybe in that way.
Yeah.
But I can see how that would impact if you weren't aware of it yourself.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, I'm really interested in what called you. So your background, you started off, you said software development, was it?
I was a programmer. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what called you to leadership? Because nobody really stumbles into a career in leadership. You might stumble into a leadership role, but I don't think you can stumble into a career in leadership. I think it's built, isn't it? And it's loved or loathed.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question. So my personal answer, I think that was always part of who I was. I'm the eldest of 4 children. And so I was always the older brother, and that played a role. There's already kind of a leadership sense there. I was in North Africa. I was in North Africa from 10 to 17, and I was in the Boy Scouts, and immediately a patrol leader. So I'd always had that. And then in college, I started doing some consulting, found some consulting jobs when I was still studying computer science, and hired a few other students, and we were doing work for local businesses. So that was already when I was 19, 20, 21. So I think that was always part of me, that leadership angle is taking charge, getting things done, even with a blindfold, being able to get across the bridge And taking pride in that and seeing my value in that.
And then the passion for being able to communicate, was that the reason why you wrote the books, or was it about, helping people to learn from your insights? What was the rationale for beginning your writing career?
So I had also always written, even as a child. I've always loved writing fiction. When I was running my company in France, I published 2 books on payment systems. These are just a quarter of a century ago. And then when I shifted to executive coaching, for the first 10 years or so, it was more just learning the ropes and getting good at coaching, the certification and all that. And then once that grew, I was writing throughout. So I would write things like white papers and stuff like that. But I'd always wanted to go back and write more books again. So that's always been in the background, writing. It's coming out more in the foreground now, and it's so much more intertwined with my actual work. So it fits together nicely.
Well, I've really enjoyed reading the first book. I look forward to reading the second book. And is there a third in the pipeline?
I'm sure there will be. I didn't know what the second book would be.
Interesting.
I thought it would be another novel.
Mm.
And then it turned out not to be a novel. I would like to get back to the fiction genre. So I'm not sure how. I'm not sure what would go into it. That'll be maybe in a year and a half, something will come out of that.
Effectively watch the space.
Right. I am. I'm watching my space. I don't know what's coming up next.
That keeps it interesting, if nothing else, doesn't it? Well, I'll look forward to seeing what comes next. I'll look forward to the release of that's when we publish it.
I'm glad you enjoyed the other one.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
I'm happy.
I enjoy those. I read a lot of nonfiction usually, but it's refreshing to see such clear analogies and to have a novel that's impactful in that way.
It allowed me to go much deeper. You'll notice the way it ended, the surprise at the end that he discovers this thing that he's been searching for and he finds, and the origin of it is just wasn't expected. And then as you unravel it, you see all of a sudden a much deeper theme that was running underneath, also built on his sense of self-worth and value and where that comes from. So it was a lot. I don't think that would have been possible in a normal book. It's the kind of thing that fiction does really well.
It's fascinating. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing it with us all, and thank you for joining me to talk about it.
Well, thank you.
But I always want to speak to leaders and leadership professionals and understand what it is that they're reading. So at the end of every year, we create a Human CEO reading list because we ask this question on the podcast for every episode. But what have you read or consumed, Aneace, that's really impacted you or been helpful throughout your journey?
So the book right now that is most impactful is called Outlive. It's by Peter Attia. And it's a book on longevity. It touches on the first wind of change of midlife in my book, the physiological wind of change. It touches on that, but from a doctor's standpoint. So it has far more technical detail on the changes we go through at midlife and how we can lean into the changes, how we can prepare for them. The fundamental idea of this book is if you want to be active at 80, 90, or 100, there are things that have to be happening today at 40, 50, 60. So it's a fascinating book from that perspective. That's the most recent one that I've been reading. What have you read recently that you really like?
What have I not read recently? So I was speaking with someone yesterday about all the non-fiction books. I did my MBA through lockdown and just read and read. So there's been a lot of non-fiction.
What was your MBA? Anything specific in your MBA?
It was an exec MBA with Cranfield. So sort of leadership in general, business management. But really enjoyed it and took loads from it. And I'm struggling to pinpoint one book.
There's so many.
Oh, if you had to press me on what, there's so many. There's so many. I really enjoyed Positive Intelligence. Read that recently by Shazad Chamin, and Blue Ocean Strategy was powerful. I think important at the moment with the way that things are going. But in terms of what I've been reading that isn't nonfiction, if you're interested in that, I've been reading a lot of novels, and Elif Shafak's Island of the Missing Trees was really interesting. I don't know if you've come across that before, but it's set in Cyprus. If you enjoy reading and you enjoy writing, in this one, the narrator is a tree, which sounds a little bit out there, but it's fascinating in the way that it's written and the story that sits around this tree. Really interesting. I'm not selling it effectively, but if you're interested, have a look.
A Greek Cypriot.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Have you read the book? Have you come across it?
No. I'm making a note of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It talks about how trees are connected. This isn't the story, but in passing, it talks about how trees can communicate with each other, and how we love the smell of fresh cut grass typically as human beings, but actually that's a chemical release from the grass to tell the other plants that danger's around.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And again, I'm not articulating that well, but I find that absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much we're discovering now, and he wove that into fiction.
Yes,
that's pretty cool.
Really cool. I really enjoyed it. So that's my top tip. Not been asked that, but thank you for putting me on the spot, because it's prompted an interesting conversation. And so, in terms of what's happening next, so the book is hopefully out sometime in February.
Yep.
And then how else can people find you? If they're interested in your work, where can they find you? Obviously, you're on LinkedIn. Are there any other resources that we need to share for people that want to get in touch?
So my website is www.aneace.com, ANEACE. And I have the benefit, although when I was a teenager, it wasn't so much of a benefit, of having a very unique first name. So I could find the website, I could get the URL for it for my first name. So that's where everything is, www.aneace.com, also on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, it's really great speaking with you. I really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you for joining us, and I look forward to following the books.
Thank you, Amy.
Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Human CEO podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please help us share more leadership content by liking and subscribing. If today's episode got you thinking about unleashing the full potential of your organisation's culture, we've got a great next step for you. Take our free assessment at humanculture.scoreapp.com to see where your organisation stands and discover actionable insights to elevate your workplace culture.